Hi, I'm Nini, and welcome to Creative Angles, the podcast for creatives by creatives. Join us as we talk to people active in the ever-expanding world of the arts in an effort to both inform and inspire. Hello everyone, welcome back to Creative Angles Season 2, if you will. Today we are here with a very special guest, Lena. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi. Well, for starters, what kind of creator are you would say?
For the most part, I've been just a composer for games and other media. But recently I've just been calling myself composer and game creator since I am sort of doing much more of the game development side of things now these days.
Oh, you're working on your own game, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I also, I was doing a little bit of research. Did you write a book as well?
I did. Ages ago, before I was actually a full-time composer, I did a lot of writing in my spare time, and so when I was I was a contract tester at Nintendo of America very early on in my career, and I got really kind of bored at work, and so I started world building and doing all this stuff for this fantasy novel that I eventually wrote, and found a very small publisher that gave me a horrible deal, and it's not in print anymore. So, if people have a copy of the book, it's called City of Tigers. Unfortunately, it is not very good SEO, so you can't really find much interesting stuff with it. It's no longer for sale on Amazon. So yeah, it's something that I want to revive at some point and maybe just self-publish my own version because the publishing deal with that publisher is no longer active anymore. So I can do whatever I want with it. So maybe I'll bring it back in some form.
Hell yeah. I mean, it seems like a broad palette of creative endeavors, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean it was very much a book that I wrote about just kind of like a composer slash performer in a
Oh,
very uh, sort of alternate history, magical kind of world.
oh wow.
The main character uses sort of air magic to create music. Essentially, it's fun.
Cool. No, that's awesome. How long have you been creating stuff for in general?
um, just like projects,
Yeah,
basically
drawing or
forever.
music or yeah.
Yeah. No, I've always I was, as many people were just, giant nerds. I was, a giant nerd in my childhood, so I was always coming up with silly game ideas and characters and stuff and sketching them. And so, it's really just kind of been a gradient of amateur to, I guess I'm a professional now. So,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
bringing those projects into slightly more manifested forms.
Was there something that really made you want to create stuff back then?
Um, Really just getting into RPGs, I think, was the
Oh.
the big impetus because I played your standard Mario and Zelda and Metroid games when I was growing up. Like that was kind of the repertoire, right, when I was younger. And then once I, was sort of, early teens, I played Chrono Trigger, which was my first
Oh.
RPG. And that just kind of set my brain on fire. Where I was just like, you can do emotional things with video games. You can have characters who actually have an emotional attachment to and have an arc over the course of a game. And so it was just this kind of experience where I was like, I want to know everything I can about how this was made and how the music was made, how the story and everything is just sort of this burning desire kind of came out of playing that game. And then other games, Mario RPG, I played a
Oh.
bunch of Final Fantasies and all that stuff. So it was just really kind of finding my home in that kind of storytelling of storytelling, not just through a book or a movie or whatever it was, but something I was actually invested in and playing and interactive and had a character that made dialogue choices and stuff. That was yeah, that was the impetus. That was what really got me excited.
Was there a point where you realized that people do this as a job?
I mean, I definitely had some awareness, that people were doing this professionally. But like for the longest time, it very much felt like, just like a far away thing, right? Because like all the
Hmm.
games that I was really into were from Japan, so it was like, oh, that's like all the way across the world. Like I have no connection to this. Like I have no ability to actually like be a part of this.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was very much this kind of like weird thing of like, I over the course of, my ch teenage and young adult years, like I became aware obviously that there was games being made in the Seattle area, which is where I grew up. And, so I became aware of like Valve and Bungie and, all of
Oh.
these studios in the greater Seattle area that were kind of, they're also, making games, but like not exactly the games that I enjoyed playing. Um, and the first experience I had with like seeing what game development was like is um, I was just kind of like tangentially a fan of like MMOs and like online role playing stuff. And I played a bunch of Final Fantasy 11 and Fantasy Star Online, all these games, and then there was one that was being in development. It was like the original EverQuest creators, like eventually like
Oh.
left Sony and started up this company called Sigil to make a game called Vanguard. And it was just, one of those games where I was just like, well, maybe if I can just kind of like get in the front door of just kind of seeing like what the fan community is like here, I can kind of see what this is all about. And I ended up like working for a fan site that was like
Oh.
covering the game and development. I mean, like working, quote unquote. I was doing like articles and stuff for them
Right,
for
like
no
writing
money.
stuff?
Yeah, just like, covering like when they came out with new stuff about the game. And we actually got, because we were just a fan site, we got invited to their studio to see
Oh.
them, meet them and see how the game was being developed. And so that was the first time I'd actually like stepped foot in a game studio for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And it was down in California. So we flew out for that.
Ooh.
And and I got to meet some people that like it was such a weird experience too, because like I wasn't like a big Western RPG person. Like I
Hmm.
really didn't go there, but the act of like, oh, there's people making games like that kind of just like was so exciting to me that I was like, okay, I actually kind of know what game development might entail, at least from like a studio perspective.
Right.
And yeah, just things, all sorts of like weird paths in life lead to all sorts of things. And after doing a bunch of contract testing in the games industry, I eventually started working for ArenaNet, which was a company located in the also the greater Seattle area, and they were working on the Guild Wars series.
Ooh.
Um, and so that was, another, Western RPG series, but like I got a chance to like be in the studio, right? Like I got to see everyone working on the game and I was testing stuff. And because I was an internal tester, I had access to the development tools uh, if I
Ooh.
asked for them. And so after hours, basically, I would just like open up the engine and just start messing around in my own little test bed and started like creating like little, quests and events and stuff in the actual engine that I was testing in. And, my excuse to the higher ups was like, I just want to learn more about how it's made so I can be a better tester.
Right.
Um, and then eventually like a designer position opened up. And so I was like, I'm gonna apply for this. Like, why not? And so
Ah.
I applied for the position and like I didn't get like the actual position I applied to, but they thought that I had like enough like creative energy to work on the prototype team that they were doing
Ooh.
development on at the time. And so it was like literally me and one other designer on this prototype team, a completely different engine. The game never released, so it was just like us puttering around on some game that was still very, very early in development. And they were just like, hey, see what you can do with these tools, like see what you can create with it. And so I was just like, kind of just like let loose into this space where I was like, you just make some stuff and test out like how all this technology works. And I was like, yeah,
Oh, that's
awesome.
so
And so
cool.
yeah, it was really, really exciting. And, eventually when the prototype project closed because, it didn't get a green light, it didn't really see sort of the light of day. They shuffled me onto the Guild Wars 2 team and, I basically helped the last year of development on that game.
Oh, sick. Did you like follow any studies regarding like art, music, design stuff?
I went to school for music.
Oh,
I was in a 4-year program at Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle and studied both classical and jazz composition.
ooh,
So that was kind of like how they divided up the classes there was, you can either do the classical route or you can do the jazz route. And there was kind of like a weird like little middle zone that was like the singer-songwriter route. And I also like took some classes there. So I was just kind of like, putting my fingers in every pie essentially and just like I want to learn as much as I can. And everyone was, very much just like interested in teaching uh, just very standard like Western music theory and history and then on the jazz side of things like jazz standards, like jazz harmonization and all of that kind of stuff. And
right.
so it kind of was me picking up as much as I could and writing essentially what my professors wanted me to write and less music that I wanted to write, just because that was like the program, right? And so on the side, I was like doing a bunch of my own music.
Right.
And this was also while I was a part of that fan community for the game Vanguard. And so one of the things that I did for the site was when I was at college, I actually wrote like fan music for the game.
Ooh.
Having very little information about what the game actually was, it was just kind of an excuse for me to just like flex the muscles that I was, training in college and like, use sample libraries and do something with that. And so I wrote these like, pieces of music that were, very loosely based on sort of like the lore of Vanguard. And that
Ooh.
was like my initial foray into, writing anything that might be considered, video game adjacent.
Right. Did you have like a style back then that you already like got really attached to, or was it very general?
Um, it was pretty general. Like the first music that I wrote was when I was in like middle school and high school, and I had a Yamaha keyboard that I was, it was like a general MIDI keyboard, so it was like, pretty basic like instrument sounds, but at least it was better quality than just like general MIDI on your computer.
Hmm.
So it sounded decent, but it wasn't like professional, sound. It could have been, if I like was good at like mixing or anything. Um, but I was, just like writing these MIDIs basically, and then just like rendering out what the keyboard sounded like, and it was very much inspired by like the games and anime that I was watching
Right.
at the time, watching and playing, and so like there was a lot of stuff like inspired by various Final Fantasies, the Chrono series. There was some stuff really inspired by like the music that was in the first Matrix movie because that had just come out.
Oh my God.
So I was like being introduced to like a lot of more of like electronic music and all that kind of stuff.
Ooh.
Listening to a bunch of Nine Inch Nails and just bands around that time. And so I was just kind of like blending all of these influences into writing kind of like, this is a piece of music that might play during a boss fight, or like this is, field music for this area or something. No games in mind. And like I messed around in like RPG Maker 2000 for a while, just not making a game, but just like making environments for me to put these MIDIs into.
Ooh. Awesome.
So I use like the default like sprite sets and everything, and kind of like one of my big projects back then was I made a scripted intro to a game, and like wrote dynamic music because it was MIDI and you could like adjust like the what channels were playing and all this stuff. And so I wrote this like dynamic music for an RPG intro that didn't exist, essentially.
Did you post those anywhere, or was it like just for you?
No, this was just literally me in my bedroom, just like messing around, and like I didn't really have like a huge online community that I was a part of,
Right.
really. So, it was before social media really sort of came into any sort of significance. So I was posting midis on like my website that got like maybe like two or three of my friends to look at it.
Hell yeah. Was there like a point where you decided to start posting? Like when that started actually existing? Like was there a point where you started sharing it everywhere or somewhere?
It, I think once I was on more on LiveJournal, I think was like my first
Oh,
like blogging platform that I was a part of, and I posted some midis there. Um, and then eventually I got onto SoundCloud when that started when it was first existing. I posted some stuff on SoundCloud and also just got like basically no one to listen to it. And I was just like, oh right, there was also I'm forgetting the name of it now, but there was a chiptune like chiptune posting site. It was just like everyone posted their chiptunes and like commented on them and stuff. And
my god.
so I wrote some like very early like chiptune stuff and put it up there, and got maybe like a couple people commenting on it.
It was all very niche back then, I imagine.
Extremely niche. Like I really didn't get much attention at all until I'm trying to remember like what was like the first thing that actually kind of like popped off for me. Because like when I right after college, I wrote a orchestral suite called Snowflight, which is also on my Bandcamp right now. It was, very much like 2006, 2007 era, like sample libraries, doing, like full orchestral arrangement that sort of like, sort of the proof to myself that like I had learned something from college. Um, and so I was pretty proud of that. And I put it up on Bandcamp eventually. It was mostly something I posted just like on my live journal, I think. I was also on like forums since I was posting stuff there. But didn't really have much of a big following there. But I posted a bunch of stuff on Bandcamp, and I think, it took being kind of visible from working on Guild Wars 2 to actually like get any sort of attention onto what I was doing.
Right. What would you say like fueled your energy back then? Because like nowadays I feel like a lot of younger people
Yeah.
are very, they get demotivated if something doesn't get a lot of traction. Like what would you say
Yeah,
kept you
no.
going?
Honestly, just the ideas, like the sort of creative spark that I had to
Right.
like make these characters, make these kind of worlds, and imagine spaces for them was really kind of like the impetus for me. Like, I'm very much like the world's greatest introvert, so I'm just like constantly in my head and like coming up with ideas for things. And that was kind of always how I entertained myself, was just making worlds and stories in my head and just kind of imagining how they would all interact together. And so naturally like storytelling kind of like came out of that, of doing writing, doing music that was kind of evoking stories of these characters without actually like saying them outright. Just here's the evocative piece that represents this emotional arc that a character might be going through.
Right. Did you have like a back then did you already have some sort of like personal style in the stuff you made or was it kind of all over the place?
Mm, I I think it was pretty all over the place. Like I definitely came from a sort of instrumental first type approach to things. All of my early music was like MIDI entry, like clicking with a mouse kind of stuff. Like I wasn't playing instruments at all. Like I was kind of singing to myself, and then I would click it into the piano roll. And
Oh.
um and so that was like, that was pretty much it. Like I really struggled with making things kind of sound natural. It was very just kind of like quantized MIDI music back then. Um, and it really took until working on Celeste for me to actually like kick myself in the ass to like play like keyboards more.
Right.
Now, because that was, I think that was literally the first soundtrack that I worked on, or that I actually played things in live for the first time.
Oh. Is it like, did
And
you
I
get
think
like a
it,
keyboard back then? Like purchase one?
I mean, I'd had one for years, but it was very much just used to like, play and like reference like what it would sound like, like auditioning instruments and things. But then it was just clicking everything in and playing it back until
Right.
it sounded right. And so yeah, like it was just like this huge paradigm shift for me of suddenly doing things a lot more live and really enjoying expressing myself through my playing.
Right.
Um, and that kind of like that sort of entered the modern era of what I write now, I think.
Would you say you put like a lot of yourself in your music?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of inescapable, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
any creative output I think always has like a trace of the creator in it. And, even if I'm not intending to be like, oh, this is about me, right? Like there's still like parts of, myself in there because, I'm the perspective that is channeling this, creative energy out there.
Right. Is it like, because like Celeste is obviously a relatively heavy IP in terms of
Mm,
storytelling and emotional core. Is it like
yeah.
harder to write from that kind of perspective than like just a normal like boss theme or something?
I think it's easier actually. Like
Oh,
I find way more inspiration when it comes from a either personal connection or a storytelling kind of hook to it. It's way more difficult for me to just like look at a space and be like, I'm going to write a piece of music that evokes this space because it's, I think, sound design, environment design, like really that's sort of like the peak of like what a space would sound like to me.
right.
I mean, I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to composition. Like I don't necessarily like to put music where it doesn't belong, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you're in a space that has some sort of emotional resonance to it, like there's a reason you're there, there's something that has happened here, there's something that's going to happen here, like those are all sort of like the things that get me really excited to write a piece of music. Like that's kind of like that's where all of my inspiration comes from. So like, some of my strongest writing, I think, for like a game like Chicory, which is there's a lot of like background music in that
Mhm.
game. There's a lot of like here's the theme for this space, but so much of the sort of emotional resonance in Chicory kind of comes from the people that have been there and like the people that have sort of made an impact on what the space is. And so I drew a lot from like the characters that were in a space, the emotions they were feeling, something that might have been left behind by someone that was there at some point in time.
Right.
That's really like the big inspiration stuff that I always find.
Was this like the time where you were already doing this like full time, or was it a hobby still?
Um, It it really wasn't full time until the end of Celeste's production.
Oh.
I was working full time in AAA game design, basically from 2011 until 2017.
Oh wow.
So about 6 years or so of just doing AAA game design. And so that was working at ArenaNet, working on Guild Wars 2. Like that was my full-time job, was doing quest design and narrative scripting and all of that. And then I was also doing music for them, but that was kind of like a side thing, essentially. Like, when I had time for it, when my bosses would let me take a day to work on music instead of doing more design stuff.
Oh wow. Did you
And
do it on the side as well, or like at home?
yeah, I had to do it at home because
Oh.
that's where all of my like composition software was. Like I couldn't really do it on site at ArenaNet, so it was kind of like around the time that we were developing the first expansion for that game. I worked out a schedule with the leads at both the design and the audio teams, and basically set it up so I would work 4 days from the office working on game design, and then on Fridays I would work on music.
Oh, awesome.
And it was completely just like, it was not standard. There was no like, precedent for that because everyone kind of just stuck to their actual job there. But they really liked working with me on music, so like that kind of became an exception.
Right.
And then the last year that I was working in AAA, I was actually at Ubisoft in Montreal,
Hmm.
Quebec, working on Far Cry 5 of all games.
Oh my god.
Um, and so I was a level designer there.
Oh.
And worked on a little bit of that game until I eventually just left the studio because I was in the thick of working on Celeste, and like it felt like it was the right time for me to just like do music full time.
Hmm.
And so that was me quitting my job in game design and just like becoming a full-time composer to finish up Celeste and then see what would happen there. So, I I had no idea that it was actually going to be a success.
Oh.
It was really good that it was because, if it wasn't, then I left my job and then suddenly like I have to like scramble to find new work.
I can imagine. Oh my
Um,
god. Was it scary or did you
yeah,
have
really
faith in it?
scary. I mean, I had faith, obviously, but like,
Yeah.
you never know for sure.
Yeah, of
You
course.
never, nothing's guaranteed, especially in the game industry,
Yeah.
as present day has shown us. Um, and so yeah, it was very much like I took all the right steps to like try and cushion myself as much as I can. Like I had a bunch of money saved up from my income at the AAA jobs. I had a Patreon that I started up that is still active. Like I don't really focus on it a whole lot now, but like that was pretty much like the moment that I started that up, I was like, I need some supplemental like income here just to make sure that I can pay rent every month and all that.
Right.
Um,
How did you end up with
so
Celeste back then?
kind of just purely by sheer coincidence. Like it was very much like a combination of putting my music on Bandcamp and then having friends that knew people at the Celeste team.
Oh.
So, I went to GDC for a couple of years, like around that time. And I met, people that were in indie games around then, and um, just kind of ended up getting connected with Maddie at what is now EXOK. And I had like a solo EP that I put out called Singularity, and that was sort of
Mm.
like my first like full album that I'd released like as a solo artist. Because I'd done some smaller soundtrack stuff before that. I did a game called Dead State,
Oh.
which was a sort of uh, zombie horror RPG. That was really fun to work on, but that was kind of like very very atypical for the style of music that I wrote at the time. And but I put out Singularity, and Maddie listened to that and she sent me a DM on Twitter being like, "Hey, we're working on this game called Celeste. Do you want to do music for it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. This sounds cool." And like at the time, it was like the only stuff that had been done, I think, was like the first two levels. And
Oh, wow.
Maddie had done a bunch of like temp music herself, because she had done music previously on like some of her solo projects.
Right.
And so she had written some stuff initially that was in the game, and so I actually took some samples from the stuff that she had written and put
Oh,
them into the original Celeste tracks.
oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
very very small samples, but I wanted to like leave a little footstep behind of what she had done.
Some crumbs.
Um, yeah, yeah, and yeah, so like from the moment that I started, like it was very like minimally finished. And I kind of had like some context for like, okay, maybe there's like some sort of story that's going to be happening in this game, but it was mostly just the levels. There wasn't much dialogue in the game yet. And so yeah, I just like started writing themes and got some initial direction that kind of shaped what the music sounded like. And then we just kind of like, just I became part of the dev team and we were just, iterating back and forth and kind of, egging each other on to to make things more like emotionally resonant. Because I would write something that was like really dramatic, and everyone would be like, "Whoa!" And then like want to push themselves to like match that emotionally, and then we kind of go back and forth. And Amora, the character artist, like she would get some ideas for like, dramatic things to do with the dialogue portraits, and I'd be like, oh, cool, and like react to that. So yeah, it really just kind of became this like really natural back and forth to like develop out the game to what it eventually became.
Oh wow. I imagine it's like people just kind of putting bits of themselves into the game itself, because it obviously turned it into
Yeah,
something
yeah.
very sensitive and emotional in that way. So I imagine that comes from somewhere in the team.
Yeah, I mean, it literally was everyone on the team just putting bits of themselves into it. Like you can really see it just kind of everywhere. Like, from the characters and writing that Maddie did to, some of the, technical like environment stuff that Noel's working on, all the character portrait stuff that Amora was doing and character designs and everything. Pedro's, pixel art for the levels and like the enemies and stuff. Like he has a very like specific style for like that kind of like upsettingly creepy like eyes and stuff that he likes to do in his art. And then getting the Kevin on the Power Up Audio team to get in there, and like he has such a specific like style of sound design. Like you can just really kind of see everyone's fingerprints on everything. So yeah, it became this sort of big collaborative project of us just like kind of all getting the core of what we wanted to go for, but like no one specifically like telling us you need to do this exactly. Like just we were just all kind of putting all of our stuff in there and like seeing how it worked together and like tweaking it as it needed
Hell yeah,
to
it's
exist
very
for that.
the magic of indie games, it feels like, looking back.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
The thing that I find interesting is you mentioned that like the music came first, like pretty intense music, and then the
Hmm.
story wasn't really even very there yet, maybe. Because like I would imagine normally it's very the other way around, right? Like you have like a person that's like, hey, I have
Hmm.
this kind of project, kind of thing that I need a song for. Is it like
Right.
harder to go one way than the other?
Um, I think it really depends on, just how much leeway you're given, like how much room there is to have creative expression. Because if there is a very strong like direction for something, then that can also be a motivator, right? Like that can be a way to be like, okay, I understand what the vision is, so I really want to live up to this.
Right.
Um, but if there is less direction, but you're allowed to experiment and to like kind of express yourself in those ways, then that also leads to potentially strong stuff. Because for me specifically, like I always find the emotional connections within even like the more mundane parts of something.
Hmm.
So like I'll introduce something maybe that has an unexpected emotional hook to it that then gets picked up on by someone else. Um, and that's the kind of stuff that like I love the most. Like the collaborations that try to stifle that, I think, are the ones that just do not work for me
Yeah.
specifically. Like, if you like some of the worst direction that I've ever gotten, like I won't name projects or anything, but like, I've written stuff before where I put something really kind of emotional into a piece of music and I send it over, and like the reaction isn't to like embrace that, but it's to like shut it down and be like,
Mm.
this is too attention grabbing. This is too like, there's too much here. Can you just like tone it down? Can you make it more ambient? Can you make it more just kind of in the background, like not noticeable? And like for that, it's just like, but then why am I here? Like, why is there music even playing? Right? Like that's kind of like my knee-jerk reaction to that kind of direction is like, why even have music if you're not using it for something, right? And and that's become like my sort of critique on a lot of media, especially recently, like with film composition, with game composition, like
Hmm.
so many things are afraid to be quiet. Um, and so it dulls the expression of music, I feel so more often than when there's like too much emotion, right?
Yeah.
And so like you get to like a lot of like big AAA games will have these dynamic scores that are just like there's always like a motor running, right? There's always
Yeah,
something
yeah.
to like try and get you to keep playing, keep playing, keep investing time, spend money on microtransactions, whatever it is, right? It's always just this like giant machine of commerce that is sort of trying to keep you in this space and like up the playtime or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's such a antithetical thing to how I feel like the strengths of game design and music for games works is like you need to be there for the experience, and sometimes the best thing to do for the experience is to just not have anything, right? It's to
Yeah.
like let the environment design take over, like let all of these things kind of breathe so that when music does happen, if there is some sort of like hook to get attached to, it's you're not being sort of manipulated in a way. Like it feels like it should be there.
Right. It's like when you have like a project and someone comes to you like, "Hey, I need music for this one thing." How much information do you usually need before you get started?
I as much as I can get, honestly,
Hmm.
like that's I love to kind of be immersed in it because otherwise like it feels very detached from what I'm doing.
Right.
So, I love to get concept art. I love to get like, dialogue examples, character designs, whatever it is that I'm scoring. Like if there's something kind of visual that I can live in, even, like rough gameplay of something, like if there's even just like a really rough layout of a level or something, like letting me kind of like play around in that space, like will always kind of get me
Right.
way more inspired to start working on it.
Would you say there's like pressure with like adapting to
Hmm.
something?
I mean, there's always pressure. Uh, for the anxious mind, there's always pressure.
So true.
No, the very true. But the um, especially like when you're coming in and contributing music or arrangement or whatever it is for something else that exists, like there's always like the kind of like pressure to be to do the correct thing, right?
Hmm.
'Cause if you're not setting the direction, then like suddenly there's like a lot more in the way of actually getting you to write something that you're confident in.
Right. Like, do you listen to, for example, like when you have something like say Minecraft or something? Because Minecraft is such a like
Yeah.
empty. I mean, not empty. It doesn't really have an identity necessarily compared to something like say a character in Deltarune, right? Like with the whole queen and stuff.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
would you say that's easier or like actually it's like
It's
harder?
it yeah, I mean it's kind of it's both in some ways. It was really intimidating coming in fresh, right?
Hmm.
Because you had all of these pieces of music that existed and like continue to exist in the game. So like you still have to like fit into that space. Like it
Yeah.
can't be like, piece of music starts and the player is being like, what the heck is this? Like what is this, music that I'm hearing? Like it still kind of has to sound like something you're expecting, especially for something like Minecraft, where like the music just kind of like starts playing as you're, engaged in some other activity.
Hmm.
Um, but then at some point, you start to kind of like come up with your own world of ideas that you're living in. And at some point, like it kind of starts to get exhausted a little. Like, I never want to feel like I'm just writing the same piece of music over and over again.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, and so without like new impetus, without new like settings to kind of to inspire you, like if it's just writing another piece of music for the same like tile set, like it becomes almost impossible where you're like, well, I already wrote that, right? I already wrote something that fits this. So like if I'm writing something else, then the more things you write, the harder each one subsequently becomes
Right.
because you're trying to both fit into what you've already done, which was already trying to fit into something else, and also trying to one up yourself in the same time, So it's like it becomes like this sort of exponential challenge. Whereas if you're writing for something new and fresh, then you're like, okay, I can use some other flavors here. Like I can make it sound different.
Right. I can imagine it's like when you're, you have your creativity when you just start. Is it like drawing where you need to like warm up, or is it just like concepting? Oh, I like this. You take that one.
Yeah, a lot of the warm up kind of comes away from the computer for me, where
Oh.
if I'm just kind of sitting there with a blank canvas or, DAW layout or whatever it is, like it can be really difficult for me to just be like, I'm going to start writing something or I'm going to sketch something because when I'm already in that space, like I'm already kind of in the mindset of like I am making something that is going to be, you know, polished in some way. And so like I have to get away from that space to really kind of like start sketching for myself. And so like wandering around the neighborhood or like taking a shower and like singing to myself in the shower, doing those sorts of things kind of like frees up my brain to start, you know, coming up with ideas, quickly shutting them down, or coming up with new ideas. Like it lets me kind of like iterate in that space where I'm not recording something, I'm not like putting anything down um, permanently. I'm just kind of like riffing with myself.
Right. Do you notice like downtime, like where you, for example, there's like a day or a week or something where it's just
Oh
harder
yeah.
compared to the week after?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, like anything creative, like your mental state plays a lot into it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I am just not in a good space mentally, like I'm not going to get something done. Like I need to do like menial tasks. I need to like, work on my taxes or like, do emails, do, data entry, like whatever it is, like
Yeah.
things that like take up a different part of my brain to like really get me back on track. Because sometimes you just don't have a creative day and like, you sit down and you're just like, I everything I'm doing sucks. Like this is all garbage, and like it's like the thing is like you have to not get discouraged by that, right? You have to kind
Mm-hmm.
of like acknowledge that like it's not you that's the problem. Like, you're just having a bad day. Like, if you come back to it tomorrow or next week or whatever, like you're gonna be just as good as you were at your peak eventually. Like it's not gonna be just like some overwhelming like I'm terrible forever, even though it feels like it in the moment. Like, I've definitely had over dramatic days where I'm just like, I fail at something for like hours and then I'm just like, well, that's it. I'm done. I'm no longer a good composer.
It's like because that's like inside motivation, right? But for example,
Yeah, yeah.
I imagine right now, especially there's a lot going on, right? It's the game industry and the world as a whole,
Oh yeah.
and
Hmm.
especially I imagine for queer creators, it can be pretty scary to put
Yeah.
themselves out there and stuff. Is there any advice you would give to people in that kind of state of mind?
I think, my advice is always that like the world is better off having more art in it than not.
Hmm.
Especially in, in these turbulent days, like, as we kind of like are dealing with this constant like corporate desire to eradicate human creativity, like it is
Yeah.
kind of like it is more important than ever, I think, to even have your like shittiest sketches out there on, in the world and like on the internet and stuff. Like I fully encourage people to like, make their own art and
Mm-hmm.
and share it with people because I think, even in like unpracticed forms, it is so much more interesting and exciting than, getting an algorithm to make something for you. Like
Yeah.
it is um it's something that I feel more than ever, and it's like, it's actually inspiring to me knowing that there are people out there that fail to understand what is like cool about being creative.
Yeah.
That like, it's inspiring to me to put my like the rough side of my artistry out there, right? I want to share like my art. Like before the past however many years like ago, like I felt completely uh sh- like traumatized from like sharing my art online. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have my art as like a avatar now. Like, it's not great. It's not like professional grade, but it's like, it's cute. It represents me. Like it is something that is an extension of myself. And, I think, embracing that and just, doing art, for art's sake, doing music for music's sake is so much more interesting.
Right.
Because, especially like as Western culture, like we have kind of like gotten away from the joy of just doing art, of just making music, not to be a professional at it, but to just do it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there was so many years ago that it was like just the thing you did. Like you just sang, you just like played instruments, like whatever. Like it was just, you don't have to like go into it like expecting to be in a band and making money and stuff. Like just do it. And it's fun. It's
Right.
and like the same goes for making any sort of art. It's like there's no reason not to, I feel.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're totally right. It's like music or art in general. It's like a type of vulnerability you have to put into
Hmm.
it. And some people might be scared off by that, but at the same time, like you illustrate, I think a lot of good things come out of daring to be vulnerable in the first place.
Exactly, exactly. And like, I feel like it's becoming more normalized to be vulnerable
Hmm.
in an interesting way with like, well, because like with the internet, like if you're putting text onto the internet, like, I didn't grow up with social media. Like I know a lot of, younger people now have grown up with social media, and like that is the expectation is you're on TikTok, you're on,
Yeah.
Instagram stories, like you are posting things on Twitter or on Blue Sky or whatever. Like you are opening yourself up to people far more frequently than when I was younger. And so I think that vulnerability is kind of, almost expected at some point. And so like it's even more important for that to include art, I think.
Right. I imagine for especially with like younger people when you just start out, right? Like you put your first stuff out there or like an art piece or whatever the heck, and you
Yeah.
get like one maybe. I mean, not even like mean, but sometimes it's just something like, yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was okay, you know, like stuff
Right.
like
And
that.
and yeah, I mean, and it's, that's reactions to anything you kind of put online, and it it sucks to deal with, but like, you're also like there are people out there that are going to like love what you're doing and want to egg you on, like want to like, gas you up, so it's like, that's you just find those people, like you find the community and you stick with it. Like that's the most like energizing thing is finding those people and like, finding the people that make you excited to put more stuff out there, and then you can get excited about what they're doing, and like that's the best right there, I think.
Right. Would you recommend a specific way of like getting to know people in this field?
I mean, it really is like getting to know anyone, like anywhere, because it's like at the end of the day, like people that are making games and art and everything are just people also.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's it can, there can be social barriers obviously, but like if you kind of just like put yourself out there, like sometimes that just is enough to sort of cross that barrier and like have someone reply to you and like bring you into something.
Yeah.
It's never any sort of social situation you put yourself into is always going to be some sort of struggle, like some sort of barrier. And like I don't have huge advice for that, because like I still suffer from that. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm I've been online for a minute. I've been, attempting to be social for my entire life, and like I don't feel like I have like, a huge social presence. So like, even though like people know who I am and kind of know my work and are fans of that, like, it's still a struggle, to kind of be a part of different social situations.
Yeah.
So like, it's going to be kind of whatever it is in your daily life, getting into, industry stuff, as well as finding collaborators to work on stuff. Like it's just meeting people at the end of the day.
Yeah, I imagine there's like a lot, at least from what I'm seeing online. There's a lot of pressure now to like play into algorithms and, like you said, be on like every
Mm,
platform imaginable. It's
yeah.
like it's good to maybe get your stuff out there, but would you say that the social aspect is almost heavier, if not of equal importance?
I think, yeah, definitely more so. Like I have a very strong aversion now to like art that is made for the algorithm just
Yeah.
because it is like it becomes predictable in a way where
Mm-hmm.
like, you might see big numbers, but that doesn't necessarily turn into something that you can utilize, and really grow upon. Like, it's a strange thing where like I've never really understood, and this is maybe my generational like perspective speaking, is like I've never really understood like, the TikTok clout type of perspective of just like, you can get big numbers on a platform, but like ultimately what does that
Yeah.
gain, right? And like if it's just like awareness of who you are, like what are you doing with that? Like what are you sort of like putting yourself into?
Right.
And so I think, yeah, like having those human connections is more important, and it's difficult, like especially with social platforms as they are, to like be so algorithmically driven.
Yeah.
Um, but the personal approach that I take is to just stay off of algorithmic stuff as much as I can, just because, that's just how my brain feels healthy. So, I'm pretty much just on Blue Sky at this point, and I just have like the following feed. Like I never look at, the recommended stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
any of that. Like I don't browse like any of the sort of recommended pages on YouTube. Like I find the channels that I like, I subscribe to them, I look at the subscription page, I follow, the people that put out new content. So it's very much like you kind of have to like curate a space, and find people that also want to curate that space and to find those connections because yeah, like anything algorithmic is kind of like strangers bumping into each other. That's kind of how it feels to me. It's like, especially when I before I turned off like public responses to to things on Blue Sky, like I was just posting, for my followers, like as like I usually do, is like I post knowing who my audience is and who is actually looking at this and caring about the stuff that I post. And then I could tell like the second it got into the algorithm, right? It
Yeah.
found
Oh.
the for you recommended stuff, and I would get people being like, who are you? I don't know anything about this. And it's just like, it's just like this really weird disconnect of just like people expect that everything that comes across their feed is because it is being for youified, that it
Mm-hmm.
relates to them in some way. And if that disconnects for them, then they're just suddenly like their worldview is shattered. And it's just like, this is just such a weird experience for me. I'm just like, why are you seeing this? I can't justify that for you. Like, that's your own problem, I suppose.
I'm sure there's
Yeah,
people that
it's
are very happy. I mean, it's like I feel it's not uncommon for people to be like, oh, I need to do all these, like the grind set or whatever to even
yeah.
get out there in the first place. So to hear that someone that people who I made it, quote unquote, that they have their own space and that's perfectly fine. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's very pleasant to hear for some people.
That's my perspective, but I'll put an asterisk there that I am of the older generation now, which is very sad for me to admit to myself, but it's just like
Wisdom.
I
You have wisdom.
I'm bringing my wisdom. You can listen to me or not. That's just my perspective.
Right. I feel like when it comes to like people creating their own stuff, it's like nowadays it feels like everyone needs to have their original twist, right? Like their
Right.
trademark almost. Do you think
hmm
that's like something people should put a lot of weight onto, or that they should just make what feels good?
I mean, I love originality. I love, when people kind of really have a thing that they're doing, because then that shows that like they're passionate about something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, it's obvious if you try to force it. It's, if you were trying to be like, your thing is just like this other popular thing, but slightly different, like, that you can kind of tell. in that way. Whereas like people that really have a voice, right? That have like, not literally a voice, but like, that have like a style that they always bring to something
Mm-hmm.
like that. I think that makes someone more interesting, like as an artist, because like you really kind of you see what they're doing, and like there's definitely value in like being a jack of all trades kind of artist, where like you can kind of adapt to anything, because that can definitely get you work for sure. But like if you want to like have that sort of self-expression, like really kind of you know, uh, getting excited by your own bullshit is sort of the way that I like to put it. Like, I forget the origin of the quote, but like there's one quote of just like, a really like the best storytellers, the best creators are like they've got to be a pervert about something,
Mm.
right? And it's not like it doesn't have to be like pervert in like a overtly fetishistic way. It's like if you were just like really into like trains, if you're like really into like show that in your art, like that's amazing, that's so
Hell
cool.
yeah.
I love to see a well rendered train,
Right.
and like that's so much more interesting than if you're just kind of like putting things all over the place. Like if you really love um like a certain way of doing synths, or like a certain way of doing like vocal processing, like you can get really into that stuff. Like you can really just like you know there's like what I think like really speaks to a lot of like Vocaloid artists is like they get
Mm.
really into like perfecting their technique on like how they program Vocaloids, and like you can really tell that they've put so much of their like creative energy into like uh just knowing the software so that they can like emote using these voices, and like that's something that's super fascinating to me, that I
Right.
love to see. And so yeah, like whatever it is, it's sort of like finding what gets you excited, in whatever like art that you're doing.
Is there a way you would recommend people to search if they don't really know yet?
It really kind of comes down to like, what you uh experience too, like, life experiences, like, the art that you get exposed to that you super jive with, like, finding artists and musicians and all of that that like are creating things in that niche that you really like aspire to. Like you can sort of take that creative energy and kind of jumble it up and like find something in there that like is something that you're really good at. That's kind of how I found it for me. It was like I just kind of I hyper focused on like a bunch of artists that I was just like, I love when it sounds like this. I love when chords do this. I love when melodies do this. Like there's like little ornaments here. Like, I grew up like really loving, Yasunori Mitsuda's music, and he did, the Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Xenogears soundtracks, and like he has a very specific way of writing a melodic line where like if he like it's very inspired from like Gaelic, Celtic music, where
Oh.
like instrumental lines or vocal lines are never like just straight kind of like melodies. They're not like always just like note to note. So like, if you would write a melody that was like ba da da da, you would, instead of just writing that, you would go like ba da ba da. Like you
Ah.
kind of have those like the ornaments to it, and you really kind of get that sense of the voice that the composer is channeling for that. And that was something that I really just like, one of the little ingredients, right, that I took, and I was just like, I want to do this too.
Like a mood
And
board
so
almost.
yeah, yeah, and it's like, it's never, it's not always like a conscious thing. Like you don't have to like,
Mm.
put together like a big cork board with like strings and stuff. Like, you can just kind of like internalize it. Like you can just like listen deeply to something. You can analyze brushstrokes. You can do all this stuff of just being like, this thing specifically speaks to me, and I want to do more of this in what I do. And that's just kind of like, that's how it starts, right? You start finding those little things that you're just like, this is it. This is the thing that I love. And then when you write something new and you put something in like that in there, suddenly you're like, oh, I love this. I actually really like this piece of music that I wrote because it incorporates all of these little things in it that make my ears perk up when I heard them in someone else's music. And you're not like taking that person's style entirely. Like you're just, you are finding the elements, right, that kind of piece together what you find inspiring, that inform what you want to write.
Right. I feel like that's definitely a bit of a not problem, but you'll have a lot of people that are nervous to copy something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like
Mm-hmm.
not that the entire internet is like that, but there's more of a culture of comparison nowadays because there's so much out there. It's
Yeah.
so easy to do it, but it's
Yeah, and
inspiration is very important.
I think it's really easy to get shut down for like, kind of going overboard and then like paring it back because like, you can put something out there and if someone's being like, "Oh, this sounds exactly like this," then you're just like, "Oh, no." And then you just like never want to do that again.
Hmm.
And that's, one of those sort of things, that's sort of part and parcel with putting all of your stuff out there. And it's like, you're going to get, sort of checked on all the stuff that you're doing, and maybe that's not the negative thing. Like, if you're just putting it out there, to get listened to, like you can kind of be like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't need to do this exactly like this,
Hmm.
um or whatever it may be. Like, but I think people find, figure that out for themselves over time. Because there's a number of like composers that I've kind of just like followed casually, like that I know about because like they reached out to me and they're like, "I love your music. Here's stuff that I've worked on." Um, and like I'll listen to like their first music, right, that they're sharing with me, and I can kind of hear like, oh, they really liked this one piece that I wrote, and
Aw.
I'm not gonna tell them that because I don't want to discourage them, but like I hear it and I'm like, oh yeah, you took the chord progression that I wrote in this song and then you kind of did your own thing with it. That's cool. And so like it's better to encourage them to keep working on it, like just keep on finding new ways of doing the thing that they like about that music. And I've seen it in a number of examples where like a composer starts out like really emulating someone's style initially, but then like they develop it, right? Like they keep working on it, they keep on doing stuff until like a year or 2 years later they're writing stuff that like you can tell that there's like some inspiration, there's a little spark in there, but like they have developed their sound and it sounds unlike anything that I ever wrote.
Yeah.
And so like I can tell that like when people stick with it, when they actually like, you know, put in the work and keep on and write more and more stuff, that, because you are writing for yourself now, like you are still you're sort of cycling into what you do versus the initial thing that you're doing, which is like kind of taking inspiration directly from something.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's I mean, the internet. It's awesome, obviously, that there's so much out there. It's just one of the few downsides I think of being able to compare
Yeah.
yourself to others in general. It's like when you have something you just made and you open a website, and like there's the most popular stuff is immediately in your face on the homepage.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to deal with that. Like, I kind of, even early on, like I was dealing with that. Like I never got any sort of like big front page attention for anything that I was writing, but it was
Hmm.
just like, I still wanted to do it because that's what was exciting for me. And like, the the first music I was writing, it was just, I wasn't posting it online. I was just doing it in my bedroom, and at some point like I would uh take a or I would burn a CD of the music that I was writing.
Oh my
I would
god.
take it out into the living room and I would play it for my parents and my sister. And they'd be like, "Oh, that's so good. We're so proud of you." And it's just like, whatever. Like it's that's the initial like encouragement you need. If you don't have that from family, like you can find that in friends, and you just keep at it.
Yeah, like would you say that you don't need to necessarily put everything on the internet? Because I feel like the environment almost gives pressure to do so. Because the algorithm, if you post a lot, then the algorithm loves it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. Like, there's definitely a lot of benefit into just like doing something for yourself that you're not like you don't have to just immediately share.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of good that can come out of just sharing everything because then like, you're engaging, and putting yourself out there, and like, people will have a greater chance of kind of seeing what you're about. But, it's not the end of the world if you just hold on to something and then maybe there's a spot for it later. Like maybe there's something that you're really jiving with that you just want to like sit on and, you know, an opportunity comes along to like collaborate with someone and like develop it out. You can release it as something else. You can incorporate that into something else. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of deal with the initial like sketches that you're working on.
Right.
But I think generally speaking, like there's no real downside to putting it out there.
No, it's a bit of a technical question that I just thought of.
Hmm.
But like when you make like music, especially instrumental stuff, how do you
Yeah.
decide how long it is? It's a very technical
I-
question.
yeah, it depends on, I think, mostly feeling for when it comes to if it's for something, then it needs to feel like it's lasting the amount of time that you expect it to last for. If that
Right.
makes any sense. It doesn't like there's no real like, rubric for it. Like I can come up with like arbitrary numbers of just like, if it's because I think like style plays into it a lot. Like you definitely see this with like if you see like an orchestral piece versus like a chiptune piece, like we kind of expect chiptune tracks to be shorter and loop more frequently
Right.
because they're not elaborated. They're not like, performed necessarily. Like they are this sort of like programmed loop essentially. And I think that chip, like lo-fi stuff can kind of get away with more. Whereas if you are like making a 30-second orchestral or just like fully instrumental loop, then you're just like, well, I'm hearing them play the exact same note again. And like because there's that human element, like you are aware that someone has been playing something and then you heard it being played the exact same way later. Like 30 seconds later, you're just like, oh, this is looping. Whereas
Oh.
like if something is more synthetic, then it's less obvious that something is just looping over and over again because, of course, it was sounding exactly the same because it was programmed that way. That's my sort of like psychoacoustic analysis of loops, but I think especially when it comes to because like no matter how short a loop is, if it's playing for like 10 minutes straight, like you're gonna get sick of it. Like you're going to be like, okay, I've had enough of this dude. Like, let's let's move on. And so like it really depends on like how long you're expected to hear that for. So if it's like, a victory jingle for a battle theme or something, like, if it's 30 seconds long, great. You might not even hear the full 30 seconds by the time it stops playing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay if it just loops after 30 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever it is, like depending on how long you're expected to look at like the result screen. But if it's something like a level that you're exploring for 30 minutes, then you want to have, variety. You want to have something that is changing over time, that has ups and downs, that has some sort of like hook that you look forward to when it comes back again. Those sorts of things that creates a sort of emotional, you know, flow when you're in a space and you're hearing music.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. If it's like if there's someone like imagine someone's like listening right now and they're like, "Oh my god, all of this makes me want to make music so bad, but I have nothing." is there anything you would recommend to like start with?
Um, just finding free software out there. There's a lot of it. Like even just getting like something as simple as GarageBand, getting like there's a Korg app on iOS that you can get that Korg Gadget is what it's called. You can just get that for free, I'm pretty sure, and just mess around with the synths in there. Like it's just kind of like a little like piano roll that you can like start messing around with synths. Um, if you have access to a piano anywhere, like if it's in a public space or whatever, like, or, someone's home, like you can just play that. There's a lot of like kind of ways you can start
Right.
making stuff. And I think, yeah, like there's a lot of like really great free resources out there, that you can just download and start messing around with. And for me personally, the way that I love to start on anything is by dissecting.
Ooh.
So like the benefit of early internet music was because everything was a MIDI, you could just download the MIDI and open it in anything and just
Oh.
like see how the notes were formed. One resource is, even though it's a bit on the older side, if you go to vgmusic.com, that is one of my favorite sites. And that is an archive of video game music that people have rendered out into MIDI. It's either like,
Oh.
original tracks or it's arrangements of video game music. You can search by console and by game, and there's just hundreds and thousands of MIDIs from games
Oh wow, sick.
dating back to like, NES and all of that. That's how I got my start. Like I downloaded MIDIs from like, uh, from Ocarina of Time
Ooh.
or Castlevania or whatever it is, and I just opened them up in my notation software, and I was like, aha, this is what the music looks like, and like I could play it back with like, shitty MIDI instruments and like kind of hear what it would sound like, in other instruments. And when you kind of see it in a visual form, like it looks more like what you would be doing also. So you can kind of learn more about how something was written. Um, and if there's any resources like on YouTube, there's like a lot of videos of where like artists will go, they'll kind of dissect their own music and they'll be like, this is how I made this track. Those are really great for me specifically to kind of be like, okay, like build it back up, like show me the most like basic version of this track, and then like you can see them kind of like build up a sound and like find what they're actually going for. And that's exactly what I love, is like I love seeing how something is made, because then I can go back and like try and like do it myself in a different way.
Yeah, I'm thinking of because like on TikTok, for example, nowadays it's a bit of a
Mm.
trend, but you'll see all these like people that dissect old songs, right? So I don't know, fucking Wii Sports Resort or something, and they have like
Oh
the all the
yeah.
instruments like separated, and they show you the timeline and everything, and it's supposed to be just entertainment, but I
Yeah.
mean, I can imagine that's like super interesting if you want to know what it's like
It's super
made out of.
useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you're hearing the individual parts, and then you can kind of like understand like why are the individual parts? How are they working together? How are they making the sound that I'm hearing in the final track?
Mm-hmm.
That's
And all
that's
the instrument
super
names as
crucial
well.
information.
It's like there's
Yeah,
so
totally.
many. It's like all the fancy digital sounds that when you just get into it must be pretty overwhelming, but when you
Yeah.
see which ones other people use, that
But
lights
it's
up the
it's
road.
it's yeah, it's building that knowledge up over time. Like, you can start simple and then just keep on accumulating new techniques, new knowledge, whatever it is, and eventually, it'll take time, but you'll be, adding on to what you know how to do.
Right. Art takes time.
Yes, yes.
Well, last but certainly not least, do you have anyone or anything that you want to shout out?
Um, Shout out. I don't know when this is going to release, but we're continually working on the game Beastie Ball, which is
Ooh.
a monster volleyball game. It's like you are recruiting little beasties to your volleyball team, and they're playing Beastie Ball with each other, and it's very fun. I'm
Awesome.
actively working on, adding new stuff to the soundtrack as it's in early access, and we've got a big update coming this week, that's going to add a whole new boss track to it, and we're going to keep on adding new stuff to that. So that is something that is actively releasing. Um, I did, a little piano editing on a tiny little indie game called Deltarune that just released some new content. So, check that out. Support Toby and friends.
Hell yeah.
I think there's like, millions of people playing it probably, but
Yeah.
like, hey, another person can hurt. Um, and then I am working on a game called Another Reel. It's a RPG with shmup battles. Very emotional story
Oh.
and fun characters that hopefully you grow to love. Yeah, still working on that, and it'll be, probably a couple more years that I'm working on it. But I'll be providing more little previews and updates on how it's going as I work on it.
Right. Well, awesome. Well, Lena, thank you so much for wanting to come on the podcast at all.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And if you guys want to check Lena out, there will be links down below, especially to her Blue Sky. So go check that out if you want to. And don't forget, stay awesome, stay creative, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.